The 1960s gave birth to a twisted genre nobody talks about anymore. While Bond was sipping martinis, underground filmmakers were mixing Cold War paranoia with pure terror. One film drove audiences to psychiatric hospitals. Another got banned for showing actual torture techniques. These 15 spy thriller horrors proved the decade's darkest secrets were hiding in plain sight. The Ipcress File. Michael Caine's breakout role wasn't just another spy thriller, it was psychological warfare disguised as entertainment. Playing Harry Palmer, a working-class agent trapped in government mind games, Caine delivered something Bond never could: genuine fear of your own side. The film's brainwashing sequences were so realistic that several countries banned it outright, claiming it revealed actual interrogation techniques. Director Sidney J. Furie shot the whole thing through broken mirrors and tilted angles, making audiences feel constantly off balance. The budget was tight at just £280,000, but they spent half of it on authentic Cold War equipment borrowed from actual intelligence agencies. Caine later admitted he based Palmer's paranoia on his own experiences during national service, where he witnessed psychological experiments firsthand. The infamous brainwashing scene took 3 days to film and left Caine genuinely disoriented. He couldn't sleep for weeks afterward. Critics called it the thinking man's spy film, but audiences walked out feeling violated. The Variety Review warned it was too disturbing for casual entertainment. Unlike Bond's glamorous escapism, the Ipcress File showed espionage as a nightmare where nobody could be trusted, especially your own government. Hysteria. This British psychological thriller masqueraded as a spy film, but delivered pure, mind-bending horror instead. Robert Webber plays an American with amnesia trying to piece together his identity in swinging London, only to discover he might be a Cold War assassin. What starts as identity confusion becomes genuine terror when he realizes someone is systematically destroying his sanity. Director Freddie Francis, fresh off directing horror classics for Hammer Studios, brought genuine Gothic atmosphere to modern espionage. The film's London locations were shot during actual fog, creating an authentically nightmarish backdrop. MGM barely promoted it, dumping it into drive-ins where it found its cult following among audiences seeking something darker than mainstream spy fare. The twist ending was so controversial that several theater chains refused to show the uncut version. Preview audiences were reportedly confused and disturbed by the revelation that the protagonist's entire reality might be artificially constructed. Webber later said the role gave him nightmares, claiming the psychological manipulation scenes felt too real. Critics dismissed it as exploitation dressed up as art, but horror fans recognized it as a masterpiece of paranoid cinema. The film anticipates modern conspiracy thrillers by decades, proving the 60s were far more psychologically complex than anyone remembers. Arabesque. Gregory Peck, trading his heroic image for pure paranoia, created one of the decade's most unsettling spy experiences. Playing a professor caught between Middle Eastern conspirators and British intelligence, Peck stumbles through a maze of deception where hieroglyphics hold deadly secrets. The film transforms academic research into a life-or-death puzzle that drives both character and audience to the breaking point. Director Stanley Donen, coming off musicals like Singin' in the Rain, brought unexpected visual flair to Cold War terror. The famous kaleidoscope sequence, where Peck hallucinates while drugged, was achieved through practical effects that left audiences genuinely dizzy. Universal spent over $2 million on location, shooting across London and Oxford, creating an authentic backdrop for increasingly surreal events. Sophia Loren's mysterious character switches allegiances so often that preview audiences kept scorecards trying to track her loyalties. The studio originally marketed it as romantic adventure, but word of mouth warned of psychological complexity that left viewers exhausted. Peck later admitted he never fully understood his character's motivations, playing each scene as if discovering the truth for the first time. Critics called it beautifully confusing, praising its refusal to provide easy answers. The film's paranoid atmosphere influenced later conspiracy thrillers, proving audiences were hungry for espionage that questioned everything, including the hero's sanity. The Kremlin Letter. John Huston directing a spy thriller sounds promising until you realize he made it a horror show about moral decay during the Cold War. An elite team infiltrates Moscow to retrieve a compromising letter. This isn't espionage entertainment, it's a savage indictment of intelligence work itself. The cast reads like a Hollywood nightmare. George Sanders as a cultured sadist, Orson Welles as a Soviet spy master, and Richard Boone as an American operative who enjoys torture. Huston assembled this group specifically to subvert audience expectations, casting beloved actors as genuinely repulsive characters. The budget reached $4 million, mostly spent on elaborate Moscow sets built at Fox Studios when Soviet authorities refused location permits. The film's violence was so graphic that several countries banned it completely. A scene involving implied castration had to be cut from most prints after audiences became physically ill. Max von Sydow later called it the most disturbing project of his career, claiming Huston encouraged the cast to explore their darkest impulses. Critics were split between admiring its uncompromising vision and condemning its relentless cynicism. The film anticipates 70s paranoid thrillers, but with a brutality that makes The French Connection look gentle. Huston intended it as his statement on Vietnam-era American foreign policy, and audiences got the message loud and clear. The Deadly Affair. Sidney Lumet took John le Carré's novel and transformed it into psychological horror disguised as sophisticated espionage. James Mason plays George Smiley in All But Name, investigating a colleague's apparent elimination while discovering his own wife's infidelity. The personal and professional betrayals intertwine until Mason's character can't distinguish between enemy action and domestic destruction. The film was shot during London's grimy winter, with Lumet insisting on natural lighting that made every scene feel oppressive. Columbia Pictures worried the movie was too dark for mainstream audiences, but Lumet refused to add traditional spy thriller elements. Instead, he focused on the psychological toll of suspicion, creating a climate where paranoia becomes the only rational response to modern life. Mason delivered one of his finest performances, playing a man slowly realizing that everything he believed was constructed deception. The suicide scene that opens the film was so convincing that some audiences believed they were watching actual footage. Simone Signoret's portrayal of a communist agent torn between ideology and humanity earned widespread critical praise for its refusal to provide easy moral answers. Critics recognized it as superior to most Bond imitations, praising its mature treatment of Cold War themes. The film's influence on later spy cinema is undeniable, proving audiences were ready for espionage stories that prioritized psychological realism over gadget-driven fantasy. Lumet created a template for intelligent spy thrillers that Hollywood largely ignored. Charade. Stanley Donen's romantic thriller masqueraded as Hitchcockian suspense while delivering genuine psychological terror beneath its glossy surface. Audrey Hepburn plays a widow discovering her husband's mysterious past while four sinister men hunt for stolen money. What appears to be playful cat and mouse becomes increasingly disturbing as each character's identity proves fluid and threatening. The film's Paris locations were shot during actual winter, giving the romantic city an unexpectedly menacing atmosphere. Universal spent heavily on location filming, but the real investment was in Donen's meticulous direction that made every charming moment hide potential danger. Cary Grant's character changes names and stories so frequently that audiences began questioning everything they thought they knew about movie heroes. The famous shower scene, where Hepburn discovers a corpse, was filmed with practical effects that left her genuinely terrified. Grant later admitted he found the role disturbing because his character's true motives remain unclear until the final reel. Preview audiences were divided between enjoying the wit and feeling unsettled by the constant deception. Critics praised its sophisticated approach to suspense, but some noted an underlying cruelty that distinguished it from typical romantic thrillers. The film's influence on later suspense cinema is enormous, proving that audiences would accept uncertainty and moral ambiguity if packaged with sufficient style. Donen created a template for elegant horror that few filmmakers have matched, showing how the most beautiful surfaces can hide the darkest secrets. Modesty Blaze. Joseph Losey's psychedelic spy nightmare took the popular comic strip character and transformed her into a hallucinogenic fever dream about violence and identity. Monica Vitti plays the title character in a mission involving stolen diamonds, but the plot becomes secondary to Losey's exploration of 60s cultural paranoia disguised as pop art entertainment. The film's visual style was so extreme that several countries initially banned it for promoting drug culture. Losey shot it like a fashion magazine come to life, with costumes and sets designed to create constant sensory overload. The budget was substantial for a British production, allowing Losey to create elaborate set pieces that prioritized visual impact over narrative coherence. Vitti's performance deliberately emphasized artificiality, playing Modesty as someone whose personality changes with her costumes. Terence Stamp's villain was equally stylized, delivering dialogue as if every line was a theatrical performance. The film's violence was presented as choreographed dance, making it simultaneously beautiful and deeply disturbing. Critics were completely divided, with some calling it a masterpiece of visual imagination, while others dismissed it as pretentious nonsense. The film's influence on later cinema is undeniable, anticipating everything from MTV aesthetics to postmodern action cinema. Audiences expecting traditional spy adventure left confused and sometimes angry, but cult status developed among viewers seeking something genuinely different. Losey created a unique hybrid of high art and exploitation that nobody has successfully imitated. Danger Route. Richard Johnson's follow-up to Deadlier Than the Male delivered psychological horror disguised as straightforward espionage entertainment. Johnson plays Jonas Wilde, an assassin whose latest mission forces him to question whether his targets deserve elimination or if he's become a tool of institutional evil. The film transforms professional killing into existential nightmare. Director Seth Holt, coming from Hammer horror films, brought genuine terror to Cold War settings. The assassination sequences were filmed with documentary realism that made violence feel immediate and disturbing rather than exciting. Amicus Productions invested heavily in authentic locations across London and Europe, creating a realistic backdrop for increasingly surreal psychological breakdown. The film's most disturbing element was Johnson's gradual realization that his employers might be more dangerous than his targets. Carol Linley's performance as a mysterious agent provided romantic interest that consistently undermined audience expectations about loyalty and trust. The torture sequence in the middle act was so intense that some theaters posted warnings. Critics noted the film's unusual emphasis on moral consequences of violence, distinguishing it from contemporary spy thrillers that treated killing as entertainment. Johnson later admitted the role affected him deeply, requiring months to shake off the character's paranoid worldview. The film's box office was modest, but it developed cult status among viewers seeking spy cinema with genuine psychological depth. Holt created a template for espionage horror that anticipated later paranoid thrillers while maintaining 60s visual sophistication. The Liquidator. Rod Taylor's comedic spy became a horror show about incompetence in a world where mistakes mean death. Taylor plays Boise Oaks, a cowardly agent who hires professional killers to handle his assignments while maintaining his heroic reputation. What starts as satire becomes increasingly dark as the body count rises and Taylor's character faces the consequences of his deception. Director Jack Cardiff, famous for cinematography, brought visual excellence to increasingly disturbing material. The film was shot across multiple European locations with a budget that allowed for elaborate set pieces contrasting Taylor's bumbling performance with genuinely dangerous situations. The disconnect between comedy and violence created an unsettling viewing experience. Jill St. John's performance as the romantic interest provided moments of genuine warmth that made the surrounding violence more disturbing by contrast. The film's torture sequences were played for nervous laughter, but their underlying brutality remained genuinely threatening. Trevor Howard's supporting role as Taylor's handler emphasized the institutional callousness that treats human life as expendable. Critics were divided between enjoying the satire and feeling uncomfortable with its moral implications. The film's box office was respectable, but audiences seemed uncertain how to respond to comedy that consistently undermined its own humor. Taylor later called it his most challenging role because it required maintaining likability while playing someone fundamentally cowardly. The film anticipates later anti-heroic spy cinema while maintaining 60s production values and star power that distinguished it from pure exploitation. The Silencers. Dean Martin's Matt Helm debut promised lightweight spy parody but delivered something far more disturbing beneath its comedic surface. Martin plays a photographer reluctantly returned to secret agent work, but the film's violence and misogyny created an atmosphere of casual brutality disguised as entertainment. What appeared to be Bond satire became a reflection of 60s cultural anxieties about masculinity and violence. Director Phil Carlson brought film noir sensibilities to ostensibly comedic material, creating visual contrasts that emphasize the dark implications of Martin's casual approach to killing and seduction. Columbia Pictures invested heavily in elaborate sets and gadgets, but the real investment was in creating a world where violence was both amusing and genuinely threatening. Stella Stevens and Dahlia Lavi provided romantic interest that consistently emphasized their characters' vulnerability to male violence. The film's assassination sequences were choreographed as slapstick, but retained genuine lethality that made audiences laugh uncomfortably. Martin's performance emphasized his character's alcoholism and moral detachment in ways that made heroism questionable. Critics noted the film's unusual combination of comedy and genuine menace, distinguishing it from pure parody or straightforward action. The box office success spawned 3 sequels, but none matched the original's disturbing balance of humor and horror. Martin later admitted he never fully understood the character's appeal, playing each scene as if discovering the moral implications for the first time. The film's influence on later spy cinema is significant, proving audiences would accept moral ambiguity if presented with sufficient style and star power. The Man from UNCLE. This television phenomenon translated to film with unexpected psychological complexity that distinguished it from typical spy entertainment. Robert Vaughn and David McCallum's partnership faced their most challenging mission while questioning the moral foundations of their secret organization. The film version explored themes of loyalty and betrayal that the television series could only hint at within network restrictions. Director Boris Sagal brought cinematic sophistication to material that could have remained simple television expansion. The budget allowed for elaborate European locations and action sequences that emphasized the physical and psychological toll of espionage work. The famous torture sequence was filmed with intensity that made audiences question their enjoyment of spy violence. Vaughn and McCallum's chemistry provided emotional anchor for increasingly complex moral situations. Their characters' friendship became the film's emotional center, while everything around them proved unreliable and threatening. The film's villains were more psychologically complex than television versions, with motivations that challenged simple good versus evil dynamics. Critics praised the film's mature approach to espionage themes, while noting its refusal to provide easy moral answers. The box office was substantial, proving television audiences would accept greater complexity in cinematic versions. The film's influence on later spy cinema is significant, showing how popular characters could be developed beyond their original limitations. Sagal created a template for translating television success to cinema while maintaining intellectual integrity and visual sophistication that elevated the source material. Billion-Dollar Brain. Ken Russell's psychedelic nightmare transformed Michael Caine's Harry Palmer into a pawn in a surreal game involving computer-controlled espionage and megalomaniacal American generals. The film abandoned conventional spy thriller logic for hallucinogenic sequences that turned Cold War paranoia into visual poetry. Russell's direction emphasized the absurdity of intelligence work while maintaining genuine tension about global consequences. The film was shot in Finland during winter, with Russell using the landscape to create an authentic backdrop for his exploration of technological paranoia. United Artists invested heavily in the computer sequences, which were revolutionary for 1967, but served Russell's vision of technology as threat rather than solution. The famous brain-machine sequences were achieved through practical effects that created genuine unease about artificial intelligence. Caine's performance emphasized Palmer's working-class bewilderment at the elaborate schemes surrounding him. Karl Malden's villain provided genuine menace through his combination of patriotic rhetoric and private army resources. The film's violence was presented through Russell's distinctive visual style that made brutality beautiful and disturbing simultaneously. Critics were divided between admiring Russell's visual imagination and feeling overwhelmed by his stylistic excess. The film's box office was disappointing, but cult status developed among viewers seeking spy cinema that challenged conventional expectations. Caine later admitted he never fully understood Russell's intentions, but trusted the director's vision. The film anticipates later paranoid thrillers while maintaining 60s visual sophistication that distinguishes it from purely exploitative material. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. Martin Ritt's adaptation of John le Carré's masterpiece delivered espionage horror without a single explosion or gadget. Richard Burton plays Alec Lemus, a British agent whose final mission becomes a journey into moral hell where human beings are reduced to expendable assets. This isn't spy fantasy, it's documentation of intelligence work as systematic dehumanization. Burton gave one of his greatest performances, playing a man whose professional competence masks complete spiritual destruction. The role required him to portray someone whose capacity for human connection has been systematically destroyed by years of betrayal and manipulation. Shot in black and white when color was standard, Ritt created a visual representation of Cold War moral bankruptcy. The film was shot in Dublin and London during winter, with Ritt insisting on locations that emphasized urban decay and emotional isolation. Paramount worried about marketing a spy film without traditional thriller elements, but critical acclaim and Burton's star power carried it to commercial success. Claire Bloom's performance as the idealistic communist provided moral contrast to Burton's cynical professionalism. Critics recognized it as a masterpiece of adult filmmaking, praising its refusal to romanticize intelligence work. The film's impact on spy cinema was enormous, proving audiences would accept psychological complexity over action sequences. Le Carré himself praised the adaptation for capturing his novel's essential bleakness. Burton later called it his finest film performance, claiming it allowed him to explore depths of human despair rarely permitted in commercial cinema. The Quiller Memorandum. Michael Anderson's adaptation of Adam Hall's novel delivered the decade's purest expression of espionage as psychological horror. George Siegel plays Quiller, an agent investigating neo-Nazi activity in Berlin, but his mission becomes a journey into personal hell where memory, identity, and loyalty prove unreliable. The film transforms spy work into nightmare about the fragility of human consciousness. Harold Pinter's screenplay emphasized dialogue as psychological warfare, with conversations becoming battles for mental control. The budget was substantial for a British production, allowing Anderson to create elaborate sequences that prioritized psychological impact over physical action. The famous interrogation sequence was filmed with clinical precision that made mental torture more disturbing than physical violence. Siegel's performance captured an ordinary man's descent into paranoid confusion as his professional competence proves insufficient against systematic psychological assault. Alec Guinness provided understated menace as the Nazi leader whose cultured manner masked genuine evil. The film's violence was presented as intellectual exercise rather than physical confrontation. Critics recognized it as a masterpiece of psychological filmmaking, praising its sophisticated approach to Cold War themes. The box office was modest, but critical acclaim established it as the decade's finest example of espionage as art rather than entertainment. The film's influence on later cinema is enormous, proving audiences would accept challenging material if presented with sufficient intelligence and visual sophistication. Anderson created the definitive statement on espionage as exploration of human psychological limits. Funeral in Berlin. Guy Hamilton's follow-up to the Ipcress File delivered claustrophobic horror set against the backdrop of divided Berlin. Michael Caine returns as Harry Palmer, tasked with facilitating a Soviet colonel's defection, but the mission becomes a psychological maze where every character's motivations remain unclear until the devastating conclusion. The film transforms espionage into existential nightmare about trust and betrayal. The Berlin Wall provided authentic backdrop for Hamilton's exploration of Cold War paranoia. The budget allowed for extensive location shooting that emphasized the city's physical and psychological division. The famous checkpoint sequence was filmed with documentary realism that made political tensions feel immediate and personal rather than abstract. Caine's performance emphasized Palmer's growing paranoia as each contact proves unreliable or actively hostile. Eva Renzi's mysterious character provided romantic interest that consistently undermined audience expectations about loyalty and truth. The film's torture sequences were filmed with restraint that made them more disturbing than graphic violence. Which of these forgotten spy horrors deserves rediscovery? Or are we better off leaving some 60s nightmares buried? Drop your thoughts below, but here's the real question. If these films were too psychologically disturbing for audiences seeking simple entertainment, what does that say about our current appetite for complexity versus comfort?